Hello and welcome to another episode of What Does the Boss Do? A series where I try to cover what every boss in Darkest Dungeon 1 does and how you counter them. And this time I'm going to be talking about the first boss in the ruins, the Necromancer. So, who is the Necromancer? The Necromancer is an unholy eldritch boss that appears in the ruins. He is an unholy and eldritch, and he is size 1 and has 1 action per turn. At Apprentice, he has 105 HP, 126 if you're playing at Stygian and Blood Moon. He has no dodge, no protection, and has 8 speed. His stun resist is 75, he has 20% bleed and blight resist, he has 40% debuff resist, and 25% move resist. Obviously, these stats are higher at Veteran and Champion, but I'm not going to be talking about them here. I'm mainly focusing on Apprentice because that's just the easiest to actually explain strategies. Compared to other bosses, his defensive stats in HP, dodge, and protection are overall, I'd say, pretty average. His HP is slightly above average at 105. The average of all bosses is 100, but some bosses obviously have more effective HP because of dodge and protection. Necromancer has none of those. He has no dodge, no protection. Most bosses at Apprentice have no dodge and protection. There's only a few ones that actually have dodge or protection. Protection is exclusive to Flesh and Pounder, and dodge is also exclusive to, I think, Hag, Siren, and Prophet. All of them have dodge, but most bosses just don't have any dodge. He actually has the highest base speed of any non-DLC boss at 8. The second highest is, I think, Hag at 5. So he is very fast. In terms of his resistances, his stun resist is below average. Most other bosses have 100 or more. Pounder is 200. Most bosses sit at 100. There's 3 bosses that have less stun resist than him. That's Flash, Hag, and Crew. Those all have 50. And Flash obviously changes depending on which part it is, but it's usually around that. His stud resist are 20% both. They are below average, but you have to consider that most bosses have at least one immunity to one type of damage over time. The bosses that aren't straight up immune to one either damage over time type usually have one resist where they are way stronger than the other. Hag, Siren, and Crew all have 60% in one resist and 20% in the other. For Hag, it's Blight, and for the 2 Cove bosses, it's Bleed. So these resists are actually fairly low. Only a few other bosses actually have resists that are this low. I think Prophet has about the same. Maybe his Blight resist is a bit higher. I know Swine Prince has 0 in both. And there was one other that had just 2020. I think Flash, some part have very low bleed and blight resists to both. The debuff resist 40%. He's not immune by any means, but it is harder to stick them. And the move resist, most of the bosses just can't be moved. Him and Siren are the only ones that you can actually move around. And 25% is pretty average, I'd say. Most enemies have around that anyways, and he's not that different. Now, for what Necromancer actually does. All of his attacks share that he summons a skeleton, so I'm not going to mention it from here on out. The type of skeleton he summons depends on the difficulty, and it's always chance-based. At Apprentice, he can summon a Bone Rebel and a Bone Soldier. At Veteran, you can summon Bone Rebel, Bone Soldier, and Bone Defender. And at Champion, he can only summon Bone Soldier, Bone Defender, or a Bone Captain. The skeletons shortly summarized: Bone Rebel, very low HP, you can mostly one-tap it with basically anything. Bone Soldier's harder to take out, he has prod, he gets stealth at Veteran, he has a bit of higher HP, he can be threatening with his damage. If he crits your rank 3, that's a lot of damage. 12 at Apprentice is about half your HP. Bone Defender, a lot of HP, hard to take out, a lot of prod. He can guard Necromancer and give himself even more prod. This will extend Necromancer's lifetime by quite a lot. And lastly, Bone Captain. He has a big amount of HP, he has prod, he's relatively hard to take out. He can hit you fairly hard with Crushing Blow, and he has an AoE stun. Now, for Necromancer's actual moves. The first 2 moves, I'm going to cover them together: the Flesh's Willing and the Clawing Dead. Both of them target the front line or the back line respectively, and deal a decent amount of damage for rate 3 to 5. It's not too high, considering Necromancer only has 1 action. So this is the entire damage he's going to deal with his turn. Other bosses just deal straight up more damage. Prophet specifically, he's going to always deal 11 to 20 with his Rubble of Ruin, so that's way more threatening. Most other bosses just straight up deal more damage than this. The only thing that these two moves really have special is that they have very high accuracy, so they are almost definitely gonna land. 102 accuracy is very high for basically any enemy. Bosses and enemies usually have around 80-70% hit chance at Apprentice, and this is very high. And his last attack, 6 feet under, targets all 4 ranks, and has the same accuracy and deals 15 stress for everybody. Now, as I've already mentioned, his 2 damaging moves aren't really that threatening. There is no real threat from them, from just straight up killing you. The only time when they can actually start being threatening is when the fight goes on for longer, when there's multiple skeletons, and the chip damage actually starts mattering. And obviously, them being cleaves can be threatening if someone is on death's door, and then you get cleaved, and then they'd easily die. 6 feet under is the real threat, or in a void, this is the most threatening move he has. Because 15 stress to everybody is actually quite good. It's basically AoE stressful incantation, the stress move that the cultist witches use. AoE stress moves do exist from normal enemies. Madman's AoE only deals 7 stress though, and it's not guaranteed. It's only an 80% chance to actually deal the stress. And Drummer only deals 5 stress, and it only has 70% chance to deal the stress. But that move also deals damage, so it can be much more threatening as a finisher. Overall, his main threat is really just that the fight goes on for too long, you get overwhelmed by a lot of skeletons, and then the stress and the chip damage he deals starts stacking up, and then you lose somebody. Alright, now that we've mentioned what Necromancer actually does, how do you counter him? The first option I've already talked about a bit. It's stuns, especially early stuns, because if you manage to move before Necromancer and stun him before he can take the first action of the fight, you essentially stop him from doing anything, because he doesn't summon a skeleton, which means you get a full turn of just hitting him without having to worry about skeletons hitting you next turn. And then you essentially just move Necro's entire game plan a full turn back, which is very important. And why he's weak to stuns I've already talked about a bit. He only has 1 action, so a stun always means his entire turn is just gone. And his stun resist is fairly low. 75% is doable at Apprentice. Someone like Occultist already gets up to 110 base, so if you upgrade it once or twice, so he's a level 2 for example, you have a level 3 skill, he has 130% base, so we get a 60% chance to stun him. And that's good enough, considering that if you get this stun, you instantly win this fight. And also this is only base. If you crit, that's an additional 20%, and if you have trinkets, it's even more. So usually you can find something that increases your stun chance before you find Necromancer. There's a lot of stuff. Dazzling Charm, the uncommon one that also gives you a 10% stun chance. That thing you can find. The class-specific ones for cultists are quite difficult to get, I'd say. Vial of Sand can be a bit RNG aligned, and you kinda don't want to fight Croc when you're a new player. And the other one is a very rare, Demon's Cauldron. Unless you fight Necromancer 2nd or like 3rd, and you already have this, but then at that point you don't usually need too much more, because then you already have a good amount of trinkets, and then Necromancer just becomes even more of a joke. So, and other heroes get their stun trinkets a lot earlier. On Master, Casual Weight, amazing. Paralyzer's Crest for Crusader, all of that stuff. You can usually get your stuns high enough that you roll a 50-50 in your favor, where you get a 60% chance or maybe even a 70% chance. And if you crit, that's even better. The other reason stuns are so good is because from Veteran onwards, Bone Defender can spawn, and if Bone Defender guards Necromancer, you either want a Guard Break, which are very uncommon, only 2 characters have them, which are A-Bomb and Shield Breaker. So the other option to deal with guards is stuns. You stun Bone Defender, and boom, stun breaks guard, and then you can hit Necromancer again instead of having to chunk through all of Bone Defender's prot and his HP. And that speeds up the fight a lot. Now, the second one is very easy. It's backline damage. If Necromancer moves back, which is the main threat of the fight, where he moves out of your damage range, and then you can't damage him anymore, and then you have to get through skeletons or move him around, and that wastes turns. And wasting turns against Necromancer can be kind of iffy, because that's when he kind of becomes dangerous. Because if he keeps spamming 6 feet under, then you start afflicting, and that kind of sucks. Having backline damage is usually recommended anyways. You really want backline damage. You just want it so you can play around Necromancer moving back. Some heroes that focus on backline damage, Arbalest, Crusader with Holy Lands, can get stuck on turn 1 if you stun Necromancer or you outspeed Necromancer, and then he sits in rank 1 and you can't hit rank 1 with a backline damage dealer, and then you just kind of sit there and do nothing. So you do have to be a bit careful that you don't stun him maybe on the first turn if you have someone like Arbalest with you. Another thing with backline damage is that you might think that damage over time is very effective against Necromancer because of his lower damage over time resists at 20%. But it's not actually a lot better than usual because he only has one action and he doesn't have any prots, so the main benefits of damage over time against bosses kind of fall off because you don't chunk through prot like against other bosses, and he isn't taking multiple actions, so the damage over time is only attacking once per turn. Against other bosses that have more actions, damage over time is like, okay, so I apply this, and this turn I'm gonna get the full value of the damage over time, and that's really good because that turns something like Noxious Blast into 21 damage consistently, which is really huge. But usually this, but with Necromancer this doesn't apply because he only has one action, obviously. The third one, Pulse. I've already talked about moving him around. This is very effective if you have bigger frontline hits than backline hits. If you have a full team of, like, for example, Arbalest, you have Bounty Hunter, Houndmaster, Occultist, then you don't really need a pull because you can just hit him in the backline and then he's gonna die anyways. But if you bring like a Leper, for example, Crusader in the front line, even Hellion, you kind of want a pull, so you can pull him into the rank that you can hit best. Even if you have someone like Hyomin with point blank shot, just having pulls on specific teams is really helpful. You don't need them, obviously, if you have enough backline damage, and if you have a good enough stunner, then you can completely drop the pulls. But it's more consistent if you have like a Leper, for example, to just have a pull. Alright, so we've talked about pull. Now it's time to talk about its counterpart, push. Pushing Skeletons is also an option to get Necro back in front, but it's less efficient than pulling Necro because of pulls effectively moving Necro forward by 2, while pushes only effectively move him forward by 1 because you're pushing the Skeleton behind him. The reason pushes can still be good is because they usually have a secondary effect, like Uppercut or Rampart having a stun, so you can slow down the Skeletons by also moving Necro forward. Usually it's not as useful as a pull, but sometimes it's the only option that you have, like when you only have a Man-at-Arms, for example, for the fight, and he's the only one you can actually bring, and then it's your only option, and, well, then you have to deal with it. And it's not bad. It's less good than stun, I'd say. Just having one can be helpful. If you like bring Man-at-Arms anyways, then you should definitely have Rampart equipped. And now the most obvious one, you just kill Skeletons. If you think you can out-heal Necromancer stress and damage, which you can't, I can just tell you that straight up, you can't. Then you can just try to chunk two Skeletons and hope that you deal enough damage to him. If you have like a big cleave like Hugh and want to rely on that, Zealous Accusation, sure. But you just hit Necromancer with like your targeted hits and Necromancer just dies in like 2 turns. But I guess you can do this. You can just kill Skeletons all the time, then you hit Necromancer when he is up front again. I guess this kind of removes the risks. But it's not a Pounder situation where you really want to kill all of the ads that he spawns. Because with Pounder itself is doing anything, right? So if you kill anything else, there's nothing happening in the fight. Like, if you kill every Brigand that spawns, Pounder does nothing. There's no attacking going on. But with Necromancer, it's kind of different because he also attacks, so you kind of have to worry about that. So the strat for Pounder doesn't work with Necromancer. And this is the strat I see most often, and it's the strat I use most often because I only really bring stuns and backline damage. Pulls, sometimes if I have them, sure. But if something moves out of range and I like don't want to rely on my backline damage because my backline damage is kind of bad, or like my Arbalest afflicted or something, or like my backline damage is just gone for some reason and died or got moved around or got stunned, sure, just killing a Skeleton and moving him forward again can be effective. But like, the first two are the ones you really care about. Stuns and backline damage, usually have them anyways, but this is what I would bring. The pull is optional. If you bring it, it's nice. For specific teams, I would always recommend a pull, especially with Leper. You really want a pull, especially at Champion. If you bring Leper against Necromancer Champion without a pull, I would consider it throwing, because you just rely on not rolling Captain, and that's not something you want to do. Just bring a pull. And Occultist is great anyways with Lepers, so, you know, just bring him. PD as well. And the last two, if you're desperate, use them. If you have nothing else in your roster for some reason, sure. If you have like, I don't know, you just are doing like a challenge or something where you only have one specific character or something, 4 and 5, that's your go-to if you have nothing else. But like the first 3 are the ones I would actually recommend. The 4th and the 5th, sure, you can do them, but they aren't as effective, and you can usually get something from the first 3, so. Alright, so now after I've talked about what Necromancer actually does and how you counter him, which heroes would I bring? So I'm gonna put him in a tier list. Usually I don't like tier lists for Darkest Dungeon because every hero kind of has their own niche, and that means every hero is kind of viable, so every hero should be on the same level. But for bosses specifically, some heroes are better than others to bring. But yeah, basically a quick rundown of the tier list. We have S tier, which is basically required because of specific strats for the boss. A tier is just very good heroes, you can bring them basically every time. They won't perform especially well, like they won't instantly win the fight by themselves, and you don't need them for specific strats, but they are still just solid. B are heroes that are unreliable sometimes, but they still make very good options, and if you bring them, like, you won't be mad. C tier is heroes that are kind of unreliable, and they kind of need a specific team to really work, or they just don't work well against the boss. And D tier is heroes that are just actively bad in the fight, and you should never bring them, and if you do bring them, you're probably griefing yourself. For Necromancer specifically, I'm gonna give a short disclaimer. S tier is basically gonna be completely empty, because you don't need any specific hero to really make this work. And that's also why Necromancer is kind of a basic boss, because most other bosses need at least one specific hero, or like a very specific threat with a few heroes that to really make it work. For example, Prophet, there's 2 very specific strats, Crew kind of, Sirens, why not, definitely Flesh as well, Hag, like all of them have very specific counters that you need to bring, but Necromancer just doesn't have that. But at the same time, there's no D tier for Necromancer, there's no hero that's actively bad, because everything just kind of works against him. And that's why you won't see S or D tier heroes for Necromancer. So, first off, we have A-Bomb. In my opinion, A-Bomb is A tier. His first great tool is obviously Manacles, his stun. It's kind of bad at Apprentice without any trinket support because of its lower base stun chance, but it ramps up pretty quickly when you find his good stun trinkets, either a Broken Key, which I'm just gonna find real quick. Broken Key, obviously 15 accuracy, 35% stun for basically no downside, and Paddock of Transference, 20% stun, 20% blight chance, and then he becomes a very reliable stunner that can reach Necromancer at any spot at turn 1, even if he summons a captain and goes to rank 3. And the other part that's very good with A-Bomb is Transform. Transform into Rage can always hit Necromancer after a turn 1 stun, and hits very hard. Like, if you look at his base damage, 11 to 20 might not seem insanely high. It's the second highest damage actually, it's one of the lower ranges higher than Crusader at 10 to 20 and Hellion. But you have to consider the plus 25% damage from Transform, and that makes Rage really solid burst damage. You don't need any extra setup from just like all the Mark characters, but still, this thing, it's really hard, and it's the highest burst damage in rank 3 without any setup, even higher than Lunge. And that's what makes Rage really good. You also get some extra utility from Slam, where you can push a skeleton backwards, but it's not too useful. Usually I just Rage and one-tap something. Overall, he's just kind of a solid hero, and he has both a stun and good damage. Next up, Antiquarian. Where is she? Yeah. She's in B for me. Her main gimmick is Dodge, just stacking Dodge with Invigorating Vapors, which is only really super good if you bring like a specific Dodge team. But when used correctly, it's probably one of the best strategies in the game. So there's a reason why she holds the world record for most Endless kills. So according to that logo, she should be in C, because you need a specific team. But I still think she belongs in B, just because she still provides solid support and utility even in teams that don't focus on dodging. Just because she has her Blights, and just getting more dodge from either Invigorating Vapors or even Flash Powder early on is just always nice. The dodge can be a bit unreliable, which is why I still put her in B, just because of how high Necro's base accuracy is. Next up, Arbalest. Arb is another B tier for me. She has insane damage when Necro gets marked, and you can never really move out of. He can never really move out of range by himself because this hits 2 to 4. And the only issue she really has, and the reason she is in B, is that she can't hit rank 1 with anything. And this can be very limiting sometimes, and you kind of don't want to outspeed and stun Necromancer on turn 1 to not lose your Arbalest damage. In addition, if you crit kill a skeleton or damage over time kills a skeleton, this can mess up Arb's damage. If the skeleton is like rank 1, it gets kills in a way that doesn't leave a corpse, Arb can't hit him anymore, and that kind of makes her unreliable sometimes. You can still very much argue that she's A, just because of how good her damage against marked targets is, but I think B is more fitting. She's just a good hero that can be sometimes a bit unreliable in this fight. Now, Bounty Hunter. Where is he? I'll take this one. Never mind, I'm taking BH is an A for me. His mark damage is kind of limited, with Collect Bounty only hitting rank 1 or 2. That means he has a huge weakness to Captain a Champion. He's still incredible for this fight, even a Champion, just because of Finish Him. Finish Him can still reach rank 3 and it's probably a better option, and it's the move I would probably bring over Collect Bounty for this fight. So I just straight up don't bring Collect Bounty and just bring Finish Him for damage. And I just think Collect Bounty is too inflexible, and BH really wants a lot of other moves. First off, the first of those moves, Caltrops. Caltrops covers rank 3 and rank 4 really well, since the debuff effectively buffs your entire team for plus 20% damage and 8 speed at champion. But it kind of has a bad range to hit Necro only in the back. So if he doesn't move back, you can't really set this up. In addition, BH also has 2 great displacement options, Come Hither with Mark and Pull, and Flashbang with the Stun and Shuffle. And Flashbang is obviously great. This thing is probably one of the better stuns in the game. It doesn't have any support, which kind of makes it worse than the others, but even with just the base version, it's still very good. It just shuffles Necro forward, it gives you a chance to stun, and it can also slow the fight down by stunning a dangerous skeleton, while also shuffling it backwards to get Necro back up front. Come Hither kinda suffers in this fight, because the mark just doesn't matter. Since any non-BH mark hero that usually has great reach on their mark synergy, like Houndmaster hits rank 1 to 4, Arbalest only hits the backline, even Highwayman only hits the backline. So, especially with Arb, you really don't want to use this, and it essentially becomes a rank 4 only pull, because if you pull rank 3 with this, he's in rank 1, and Arbalest can't hit that, so that's why coming on mark teams is kind of bad. And the mark payoff just doesn't exist, unless you pay off with himself. And that's, unless you run like double Bounty Hunter, it's just kind of very slow, which is why I don't like it. And that's also why I tend to drop this completely for Mark for Death, because Mark for Death also marks, but it also sets up your own offense or Caltrops next turn, so even if he's in like rank 3, you can put up Mark for Death. Next turn you probably outspeed because you get that plus 5 speed, and then you press Caltrops, you get that plus 20% damage, and it's just really good setup. So what I usually run looks something like this. It's not something I would run for dungeons, definitely not. For dungeons I tend to run something like this. You can obviously bring the pull, you can bring uppercut. He's very flexible in terms of moves, but this is what I usually go for. And I just prefer him as, even in mark teams, heavily dedicated mark teams, he's usually not the payoff, because I just like him as a support or setup hero in this fight. Because every other mark setter in Houndmaster and Occultist usually is kind of busy pressing other buttons, because Houndmaster and Occultist really want to press stuns in this fight. And that's why he just kind of gets relegated into, oh yeah, you have to mark because nobody else really wants to mark. Like, Arbalest is not marking. If you use Sniper's Mark, you are throwing. Come on. That's why Mark for Death is kind of the only mark option I would really consider bringing. Unless you like bring Houndmaster and ignore turn 1 dodge and turn 1 stun and all of that stuff, or you get the first stun you try, and then Houndmaster or Occultist can actually mark. But usually Bounty Hunter gets funneled into that role for me. Crusader for me is also A. He has 2 main playstyles for this fight, either focusing on a backline Crusader on Holy Lance damage, or one in the front line that focus on Smite and Stunning Blow. Lance basically has the same issues as Mark. Is Arbalist, not Mark. Arb. Sometimes not being able to actually hit, and instead sitting there doing absolutely nothing because he's in rank 1. But the thing that pushes Crusader into A is really his frontline playstyle for me with Smite and Stunning Blow. A champ, he's pretty much just Leper with his damage, but he also has the stun he also has a stun from Stunning Blow if Necro sits in rank 2. Or it can slow down Captain. He's pretty much just a slightly weaker Leper with a great stun up until champ, which makes him pretty flexible, being able to switch between damage and stun. And just having that flexibility is great, and while he might not be as good as other heroes for this, he's still good enough for at least a low A tier for me. Flagellant. Flagellant is probably the worst hero for this fight, and the only C tier. It's not even because he's bad for the fight, he's actually pretty decent. Necro has very bad bleed resistance, and Flagellant can hit rank 1 to 4 with Punish and Rain of Sorrows. The healing is still great, Reclaim is insane healing, Redeem as well. And the reason he's this far down is more about the dungeon. Flagellant into Skeletons is just not a great matchup because you lose the bleed. You shouldn't be surprised by this. And on the one hand, he can't really do anything to take off the pressure when Necromancer starts overwhelming you with too many skeletons, since he doesn't really have the kill power against them. You only have Punish base damage, which isn't great. And on the other hand, he's just kind of a downside in the dungeon, and he's just a solid hero against Necromancer. It's not uncommon to have a hero that's very bad in the dungeon, where you take a downside in the dungeon and then get a bigger payoff for the boss. Guardian Shield Mad-Arms is the biggest example of this. He's either a weaker party member sitting in rank 4, or you have an effectively empty trinket slot for the dungeon as a trade-off for a way better boss fight, because Guardian Shield as an upside is incredible. Can I find it? Where is it? There it is. 10% prot, 50% healing received, 10 dodge. The 50% healing received is really insane. Like, all of this is so much defense that for specific fights you really want this. So you bring him anyways and just have him sit in rank 4, which is kind of bad. Or have him run another trinket and just ignore this. And just have him as in his usual playstyle, which gives him an empty trinket slot. But it's worth it, because the fight gets so much easier if you have this. And Flagellant is that semi-downside, where you don't have a full hero really, without the payoff you should get for dragging him along. And that's why he's in C. He's not in D, because he can still pull some weight, even against the skeletons with his recovery and one-hit damage. And he's still not bad against the boss. Like, if you just consider the boss, I would still put him in B, or maybe even A. Probably more A than B. Because you still deal great damage against Necromancer. Like, he just deals his regular damage. And that's still very good. Next up, Grave Robber. Grave Robber for me is another A. Lunge is just fantastic. Into rank 1 to 3 when Necro will be sitting for most of the fight. When Necro moves into rank 4, she's completely stuck. You can still do damage with Poison Darts or Throne Dagger, depending on which one you want. And she's most effective on a team that can move around to enable double lunge, where you lunge turn 1, lunge turn 1 into rank 2, and then you get pushed back into rank 3 and then you lunge again for maximum damage. But just using lunge and then using Shadow of Fate can also do the job just fine. It's really just the usual Grave Robber playstyle for this. In the same way, we have Hellion. Hellion is really just her usual stuff. Like, you just bring moves and you hit them. You just hit Necromancer in whatever rank he is. It's just the average Hellion playstyle. You can consider pulling Necro into rank 1 just to get bigger bleed-off payoffs, because this move hits really big, and since he can be bled, you get maximum value from bleed out. So it can be worth it. It is a bit difficult to set up, but sometimes it's worth it. Just be aware that bleed out is really good against him. Now, Highwayman, Highwayman also falls into this category, and he's also an A tier. He hits every rank, he puts up riposte, he clears skeletons without using actions, just his user stuff. You can also pair him with Antiquarian, to always get a riposte on both the Necromancer's damaging moves by having high mana start in rank 2. Rank 3, you do this into rank 2, and then you have riposte in the front line, and you have riposte in the back line because you have Antiquarian using Protect Me. So Hornmaster, he's another easy A tier. He has Omni Reach Hound's Rush with great damage, and you get Mark damage on top, and you get a Dog Treat damage on top. Just don't forget about the Dog Treat, very important, don't forget. And he will just start melting Necromancer with all of those damage buffs. He also has great utility with Blackjack, being a relatively consistent stun reaching 1 to 3, and always having a chance to stun Necromancer on turn 1. His Mark falls a bit to the wayside for him in this fight, with his stun being too important to focus on setup. His guard is just great to have, it's a safety net for when things start to go wrong. Next up, Jester. Jester's A tier. Press Battle Ballad on loop when you play him almost optimally for this fight. Ballad is just madness, it just boosts your offense to insane levels. There's a reason people sometimes consider this thing the best move in the game, which I sometimes do as well. The only thing you really have to pay attention to with him is when you want to press solo into Finale. I recommend to press solo when Necros are around half HP, but this threshold really depends on how much damage your team can put out in a single turn. Now Leper, where is he? Leper. He's another A. On Apprentice and Veteran, he's so insanely good at doing damage to Necro, since Captain isn't really a thing yet, and I would almost consider him as just for that. His chop hits insanely hard, and that's all Leper needs to do. On Champ he becomes kind of iffy. He needs to rely on team support for pulls more often, but is still a really good damage dealer nonetheless. Now Mad Arms. Mad Arms is also A. He has good reach and solid damage with Brush, and Rampart gives him a displacement tool for skeletons and a stun, so you can knock a skeleton behind. And Bellow can also be very helpful, just slowing down Necro so you can stun him next turn before he can act if you stick the debuff. And obviously his guard is just great to have for extra safety. Occultist is probably the closest you can get to S. He just has so much utility and fits on basically every team. Hands from the Abyss is a move that was so broken, Reto removed it in Darkest Dungeon 2. And it's the best single target stun in the entire game. And that's quite good in the boss that loses 2 stuns. And in addition, he also gets a pull, which helps with a lot of teams. He gets a mark that helps with mark teams. And even if you don't want the pull, for example, you can still run Sark Stab for some decent damage. He isn't the best damage deal you can get, but he can support basically any playstyle with his stun, mark, and pull. And his healing might be unreliable, but Necromancer isn't usually nuking you every turn to the point where a low roll on this will kill somebody. If you have good enough HPs going into the fight, you usually don't even need to press weird. And even if you press weird, if you low roll, it isn't too big of an issue just because of how little damage Necromancer is putting out very often. Now PD. PD is also A. She does lose her best move in Blinding Gas, because it's very limited, and it only gets value after the second summon on champ in the best case possible. But instead of bringing Blinding Gas, I really recommend Disorienting Blast. It's both a solid stun while also being able to shuffle Necromancer forward. Her blights might not take down super quickly, but they give her quite a bit of damage in addition to this Orienting Blast's utility. So you just get solid damage and a stun. Now, Shield Breaker. Where is she? Jesus. There. Shield Breaker is also A. You get Omni Reach Pierce and you get Puncture being a pull. And a Guard Break at the same time. So you get both very flexible damage in terms of Pierce, and you get some utility. Adder's Kiss is a solid opener. It deals more damage than Pierce because of the minus 10% damage on Pierce and the Blight. And when Necromancer stays in the front, you can cycle Pierce and Adder's Kiss. You can even cycle Puncture and Adder's Kiss if you want to. But she's just overall a solid DPS you can basically put on any team that doesn't need to rank 1 spot with someone like Leper or something. And last but not least, we have Vestal. Wester's the final 8 here. She has a decent stun, and he has Omni Reach with okay damage from Judgment, but she doesn't offer too much, and so healing isn't as important because of Necro's low damage. And yeah, that wraps up all the heroes on the tier list, and now I'm gonna show a short example fight, and see you there. Alright, so I'm at the fight against Necromancer. I have pretty standard Mark team. I have Arbalist, obviously. This is very endgame because I actually cannot be bothered to like level another team to like apprentice, so you're just gonna have to deal with champion numbers, but it's essentially the same thing. This team, yeah, just hits Necromancer. That's basically the game plan I have, and I'm gonna see if this works. Hope the blood, and I just press the mark. There's nothing else I really want to do. This is obviously, this is the thing I was talking about with Arbalist. I kind of don't want to stun here with Hands from the Abyss, because if I do, Arbalist can shoot Necromancer, and that's a huge damage loss. So I'm forced into a worse option, which is Sexstab, which is still 15 damage, but it's a lot worse than what I could have gotten. This is the other scenario where Bone Captain spawns, and that's also why I made a right play in not having Collect Bounty instead having Caltrops, because this way if I didn't have that and had Collect Bounty, I would have had a lot less damage against this guy, right? So now Houndmaster, I just pop, and I probably go for Hound's Rush because it's a lot of damage. Could also go for this, 150 against 110, the 35% chance. So it isn't too high. I might just go for damage. 18 to 33 is really good. Yeah. Also got the bleed. Arbalist, this is my main damage source. 20 to 40 with 60% crit chance. Yeah. That's why Arbalist is kind of worth it, right? Like if you build her right and you have good damage trinkets and like a good damage quirk, her damage output is insane. Like 60? Incredible. And Caltrops, didn't get the debuff, got absolutely nothing. He's in rank 4 now. This is where you would like to have a pull if you had like a leper or something, because otherwise you can't really hit him. But with this team I just like stun this and just keep hitting him, because I have 2 Omni Reach attackers basically. And he's almost dead already, so yeah. Like I kind of got lucky with crits there, and this is obviously not like a team you usually get, but this is how the fight usually goes. I also didn't get a stun onto him, but this is just an example of backline damage just winning, and the fight's over.
With no living sinew to actuate them, will these walking bones finally fail?
And that's basically the entire fight. This was obviously a very high power team. I had Arbalist crit a lot, and sometimes you just don't get that. And this is obviously champ, so Arbalist is a lot better. I have basically perfect loadouts. I have a lot of good stuff. So obviously you can't just kill him like that very often. But I also got pretty bad RNG with speed rolls. I didn't get the stun from Hands from the Abyss, but this fight is so easy that even if you don't get your primary game plan of like stunning him in rank 2 or in rank 3, you can still deal with him, because you just outdamage him. And because he has no defenses, Mark teams just melt him, everything just dies, and yeah. That was basically the average Necromancer fight. You just roll him basically every time. And yeah. So that was the guide. I have nothing more to say about the boss. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe. I'm gonna try to push out the next guide in like the next week or so. I'm gonna fail because I have the work schedule of literally nothing. I don't have any work schedule. I just do it and hope I don't forget. If you have any feedback on how to make these guides better, please put them in the comments. This is my first time trying something like this, so any feedback is appreciated. And it is very possible that the audio is kind of bad, because I can't really check it anymore because my headset broke, so I can only hear on one ear, which is majorly annoying. and I literally cannot be bothered to like wait a week until my new headset arrives, because then I will forget about the guide and I just won't do anything anymore. So very unfortunate, but it is what it is. And yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. If you disagree with my hero rankings, fuck you. I'm right. Just trust me. I am correct. But yeah, have a good day at whatever you want, and maybe see you next time when I make the next guide.